Welcome to Alignment, using your values to invest in social change, brought to you by Oikocredit US. We're proud to bring you this fifth in our series of interviews with experts in the field of values-based investing. I'm Matt Eldridge, CEO of Oikocredit US.
And I'm Sara Shoff, Chief Operating Officer of Oikocredit US. We're delighted to have as our special guest today, Dr. Jane Reisman, a global expert in the field of impact measurement and management. How do you know if your values-driven investments are making a difference? Dr. Reisman has an answer for us. Before we introduce Dr. Reisman, just a quick word about who we are. Oikocredit US is the nonprofit US affiliate of Oikocredit International, a 45-year-old global cooperative that works to improve living conditions in low-income countries. Oikocredit does so by investing in microfinance and small and medium enterprises in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Our job here at Oikocredit US is to raise awareness and financial support in North America for these efforts.
We are thrilled to speak today with Jane. She's an experienced evaluator, strategist, and thought leader in the fields of philanthropy and impact investing. She founded ORS Impact and has advised clients such as the Rockefeller Foundation, the Global Impact Investing Network, and the World Economic Forum, among many others. Jane, thanks for joining us. We're so happy to speak with you today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Jane, we first met a few years ago in Seattle at the introduction of Melanie Audette at Mission Investors Exchange. And I've been excited to reconnect today because your expertise in impact measurement and management is so timely. It's relevant to this alignment series and to what our stakeholders care about, because there are some people, certain philanthropists and impact investors, who criticize efforts to measure impact. Among other things, they argue not everything that matters can be measured. What do you say to them? Why does impact measurement matter?
Well, I would first say I agree that not everything that matters can be measured precisely, but I do believe that we use proxies to measure so many things that are relevant for us to be tracking. And if we don't measure impact, then we can't just say that our intention to have impact equates to having impact. And the good news I'd like to share is that there has been so much progress made in how we go about measuring and managing for impact in the impact investing space, so that really bright minds and work on the ground and experiences of trying out different measurement approaches have brought us to a place now where we have some really great measurement options and management options. So I'd say it is worth doing and necessary to do.
Jane, that's good to hear. Thanks. What would you say are some of those proxies?
Well, some of the proxies, one that is the one that has been leading the way, is the IRIS Plus system. And that has been the initial measurement catalog that was launched in about 2009, when the field of impact investing was actually named and incubated at the Rockefeller Foundation. It has come a long way. It is now on its what might be called its fifth revision, but actually it's more than a fifth revision. It's actually now an end-to-end system. And instead of just a catalog of metrics that you can pick which of these metrics make sense to me, it now has been backed up by evidence-based research on what are the outcomes we know actually get produced by what strategies, and that there's a core metric set that says, here is the set of metrics to use if this is your vertical that you're measuring. And it's based on evidence. And so that's a really good example. In addition to that, I would say that the Impact Management Project has blazed a trail to give us a way to say, what are the dimensions of impact? And that our proxies need to be in those 5 dimensions if we are to say that we're really looking at what is impact. And so the Impact Management Project has been adopted widely by so many standard bearers and consensus builders, that are working together and adopted by different groups so that they're all reproducing each other's categories. And so we can start to have some of that standardization about when we talk about impact, what do we really mean by it? So those are just two examples I'd like to highlight.
Got it. Thanks, Jane. At Oikocredit US, we are, as you know, the independent US affiliate of the Oikocredit International Cooperative, which is based in Europe. Our colleagues there at the cooperative on its social performance innovation team work with Oikocredit's partners in the field. They sort out what gets measured, and they tell us that it's really a kind of balancing act, that not every partner is measuring the same thing. And you've got to work with partners where they are and be mindful of their capacity for measuring outcomes. What progress have you seen among institutional investors like Oikocredit to standardize what gets measured?
Yeah, so I think that that's a really central question. The question of standardization is on everyone's mind, especially when we start talking about finance, which is a very standardized field. And the business of finance is a bit different than the business of changing lives and impact. And so the question is, what do we standardize and how? So this effort, led by the Impact Management Project, and that was joined by many other organizations, has been trying to standardize in certain ways. And those ways might be that take the categories of the Impact Management Project. It's who. Let's standardize on who. Who are you serving? Who are you benefiting? Is it the poorest of poor, as Kate Cochran spoke about in her prior interview with you? Or is it low-income people who are, above the poverty level, but don't have enough capital to participate in society? Is it by gender? Is it by race? Is it by geography? That's an easy thing to standardize. And if one actually addresses who are they benefiting, then you can track, are the people benefiting the people you intended to benefit? Another category is what, and we have many ways of looking at what. We have the SDGs, which majority of impact investors are associating with the SDGs.
Jane, just to jump in, can you remind us for our viewers what the SDGs are?
SDGs stand for? Sure. The Sustainable Development Goals that the United Nations created as 15-year goals, which replaced the Millennial Development Goals, the MDGs, if we want some more alphabet soup. And the really beautiful thing about the SDGs is that it's moved beyond countries. It's saying we need every sector working together to address our global problems. And that they brought in the private sector and government and the civil society actors in order to say, what does it look like when we all agree on what the goals are that we need to work on, and that we all measure our progress toward those goals? So the SDGs give us 17 handy categories, and that is one way to standardize. Or one could standardize by other categorical schemes that are available. So, but the point is what? Like being very clear on what it is. Then the other three categories I'll say very quickly is how much. One thing that's very different in the impact investing field is who's really focusing on deep impact and who is trying to do well and also get the highest rate of financial return at the same time. And without any judgment, it's just very important to declare, where are you in that spectrum? Are you trying to do well and try to avoid negative impact? Or are you trying to create new solutions that may actually be transformative, but may not have as high level of financial return? So what is the breadth and depth of impact you're having is another place to standardize. And the two other categories are contribution, which are unique contribution. And that is, there's categories of investor contributions. Are you trying to catalyze new ways of thinking? Are you trying to signal market attention? Are you trying to add capacity and technical assistance? And the last one would be risk. And that's another area to standardize, to actually acknowledge what is the risk you might be doing more harm than good, or acknowledge that your intervention strategy is not necessarily tested and you're testing it, and that you may be adapting it, but there are many risks that we need to be aware of. So that's an area of standardization that is above the level of a metric. But if we can have consensus that impact has those 5 dimensions, then any group can actually declare where they are within those 5 dimensions.
Your area of expertise is called impact measurement and management. What's the measurement part and why is that important?
The measurement part or the management part?
The management part. You just talked about the measurement part. What is the management part and why is it important?
Right. We talk about measurement so much that it's easy for us to like stay there, but it's really interesting. And as you know, as you said in the introduction to me and why I'm even, involved in this conversation is that my experience and background has been as an evaluator. And in recent years, I turned my attention to moving away from solely public sector and social sector work to what is really happening in the private sector, in the impact investing space. And what is really important here is that the social sector learned a lesson that if you collect data in order to report, that you really don't use that data to help guide decisions. You don't use it to help develop policies. You don't really use the data in meaningful ways. It's a reporting exercise and accountability exercise. And the movement right now is that data is useful if it informs how you manage for impact. So looking at the data regularly and thinking about it throughout the investment cycle is the management part of impact measurement and management. And it's an acknowledgement that measurement is not just something you do in the due diligence process, that you don't just look at and declare what you're going to measure, that it is something that needs to be a continuous cycle. And a group such as like the United Nations, so UNDP, a unit of the United Nations, has just come out with impact standards. And in those impact standards, they've gone further than anyone's gone further before by saying that if you want to be, I'm going back to my SDGs again, if you want to do more than say, I have a picture of social development goal number 2 about what I think it's ending poverty on my website, because we're all about ending poverty, that you actually need to show that you are managing your investments in order to be ending poverty, and that you actually have in your management systems ways for looking at data and using that to adjust your strategy, and that it's part of your governance and it's part of your strategy development and it's part of your purpose. So impact management is starting to get incorporated into the very culture and management systems, rather than the measurement is, you find yourself an expert who knows how to measure. You find yourself a set of metrics and you apply those. And then you have this beautiful glossy report. That is not managing for impact. That is telling the world we are about impact investing. So that is really where impact management comes in. And many people are really shorthanding it. And they're just saying, let's call it impact management. Let's not even call it impact measurement and management. You're measuring so that you can manage, and not measuring as an end in itself.
So the standards that you just referenced from the UNDP, as well as this idea of management or a management system, I think really links to the next question that I have. So we recently released a report on the US impact investing market. It's available on our website and will be in the YouTube description for this webinar. And we found that the demand and interest for impact investing has grown exponentially over the past decade. And one piece of it, or maybe a separate industry that has also grown exponentially, is an interest in environment, social, and governance funds. And those tend to be far more available to retail investors, things like exchange-traded funds or ETFs. Some are arguing, though, that within that rise of ESG and those publicly traded funds, there's greenwashing or impact washing, and it's hard to tell what investments are really impactful or not. So how can impact measurement and management ensure the truth in the advertising of these ESG funds?
I love that question. And I love it for many reasons. One is that it just, shows your deep commitment to anti-impact washing and greenwashing or rainbow washing of the SDG colorful logos. May I take the liberty to share a graph that might be helpful?
Yes, please. I'm sure that our audience would love to see a visual to understand some of these complicated pieces.
this graph is something that I was working on for a while and collaborated with my colleague Veronica Olazabal at the Rockefeller Foundation in order to really start to understand the landscape of ESG and IMM, both of them being wonderful alphabet soup letters. And what's happening here is that people will often say that the world of impact investing is quite confusing. It's hard to distinguish between what the difference is between funds and what's the difference between an ESG fund and, let's say, an impact investing fund or direct investment in impact investing. And what this chart is showing us is that over time, we have seen a proliferation of methodologies growing to assess what are your scores on impact. And this chart tries to create a bit of order on that landscape. And what you'll see is on the left-hand side is that there's a number of proprietary methods. And that's really where the field started growing, is that each organization developed their own methodologies and would say that we have a way to measure environment, social, and governance, or impact. And that over time, in order for impact investing to continue to grow and develop credibility and not be something that is about impact washing or greenwashing, there's been a movement to let's agree on standards in the field and let's share those measures and let's build on each other's work. And that is the field-oriented, consensus-driven measures, which you start to see on the right side of the axis. And then the vertical axis has thematic or impact investing focus. And the bottom has screening, ESG, and sustainability focus. And I know you spoke about that at a prior webinar to try to make the distinction around the continuum or the spectrum of impact investing. So by creating 4 quadrants, it allows us to see that the left side, the first 2 boxes, are really more about proprietary methods. The top ones are about impact investing focus, thematic, and the bottom ones are ESG. And the right side is the field building. So if we look at the bottom 2 of ESG, we really start to notice which are the methods that are focusing on measuring environmental, social, and governance, which is how you do business. It's the inputs to your business. Environment, like how do you treat the environment and your supply chain? What kind of environmental policies do you have? The social would be your way of treating employees, policies about employees and betterment, the way that you treat your vendors. The governance would be about your boards and your decision-making processes, but they're all the operations of a business. And the impact measurement and management starts to move over the line to what difference are you making in the lives of beneficiaries, or what difference are you making on the environment? And so we need all of these. We need the ESG funds very much so, because we're talking about the trillions of dollars. On the impact investing side, we're talking about the billions of dollars. And in foundations, we're talking about billions of dollars. So in reality, if we want to redirect capital, we need the ESG funds and the impact investing funds focusing on making the world a better place, more sustainable, more just. But what I hope happens over some time, and there's lots of discussion about this, is that the ESG measurements start to go a bit further, and they incorporate not just how does the business run, but what difference are they making on the lives of the people who they're intending to benefit. And this coming together, because ESG often goes under the label of impact investing, this coming together of the ESG world and the impact investing world will allow there to be greater impact, which is really what this is all about anyway. It's not about saying, align your dollars and with your values and invest in this ESG fund, because then you could feel good about where your money is sleeping at night. as I'm borrowing a famous quote that I want to probably attribute to someone else. But it's also that you really are making a difference and that your company is intentionally being considered about the environment, society, and governance. And so that is really what I want to say about this world is not even, ESG does not equate to the IMM right now, but the IMM field is really building itself on a more thematic and solution-oriented approach, and the measurement systems for that would really benefit the ESG. And the consensus building and the sharing and transparency is really critical, because otherwise we all know that we've been reading articles and we've been seeing in the news that some of the best ESG funds really, we don't know what the scoring mechanisms are. We do see the underlying companies and they don't really seem to match up with what the ESG fund label is in many cases. And so the greater transparency that the IMM is bringing, and verification and disclosure, that actually you can verify this, is really something I hope the ESG world continues to move. There are regulatory environments that are starting to ask for that. And let's just hope some voluntary actions can happen so that it doesn't need to be as highly regulated, and it can be done, voluntarily through public actions. It's a long answer to a question, but it's very important, and I hope that I made it a little bit clearer, didn't confuse it more.
Thanks, Jane. Like you said, it really can be kind of an alphabet soup for many. And do you see hope when it comes to individual investors, retail investors, as they're trying to get a handle on, they want to park their assets somewhere that aligns with their values? And when they think about an ESG fund, or an investment advisor tells them, hey, here's an ESG exchange traded fund, you should think about this. I mean, do you see hope on the horizon that there's going to be more accountability and more clarity around, sort of the impact that those kinds of funds are having, or just greater, some clarity and standardization that's going to make it easier for just an individual to know, hey, is where I've parked my assets, is that actually making a difference?
Yeah, I am very hopeful. I mean, I think anyone who's in the impact business needs to be an eternal optimist, and just hope that the good intentions that people express are really what is, driving their behaviors. I think that the difficulty is that with a lack of transparency, we cannot really know where our money is, and that there is a greater demand and recognition that the ESG funds are needing to be more transparent. And there are efforts. I read last week about a new platform that the Ford Foundation or Meteor Foundation are investing in together. I think it's called Novato. It's a social enterprise, so that ESG funds could actually put their data on this platform, and it could be standardized and could be better shared. There are individual actions, like in any kind of movement, you just need to have some of the innovators leading the way. I know that in Europe, there is greater amount of disclosure happening in the regulatory environment, so that ESG funds will need to declare what exactly is the impact they are creating. Is it sustainable investing? Is it responsible? Is it actually thematic and deep impact? And there's conversation happening in the US government right now about more disclosure and verification. So the impact side, let's just face it, the finance side has a lot of visibility, a lot of verification, a lot of disclosure, a lot of audit. That transparency is necessary on the finance side. The impact side needs the same amount of attention if we really are trying to say we're doing something that is weighing the benefits of impact alongside the benefits of finance. I am hopeful.
Thank you, Jane. Before the program today, you mentioned you'll be attending Socap, the annual social capital conference that will have wrapped up before this episode is released. So often that conference draws the who's who of key players in the impact investing industry What are you looking forward to the most about Socap this year?
Well, I'm sure I share the same sentiments as many, that without going there in person, there is a real loss of just the energy, the momentum, the inspiration of being among so many folks that are trying to marry money and meaning. Not to mention, it's just one of the most amazing conferences I ever attend. That being said, I need to shamelessly plug my own session because it's actually not about me or my session. It's actually a session about a global partnership that I've been part of that's been funded by, I'm going to do another OECD alphabet soup, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, about increasing stakeholder engagement in how we think about impact. That it really should not be something that is decided by people who have capital and done to people who are in communities. Impact needs to be thought about in partnership with the people who are most affected, or the communities most affected, or the people who are really stewards of the environment most affected. So that our session is really the result of a 6-month partnership of 26 people and 13 countries that have all said, how can you effectively engage stakeholders in thinking about what impact really matters to them most, and in tracking whether things are really getting better or not? So my session has 60 Decibels, which is a wonderful organization that makes it very easy to collect data from stakeholders. And it includes the UN SDG Impact Standards team. And it includes the Rockefeller Foundation, which routinely wants to know what stakeholders are feeling and thinking and experiencing and the way they measure impact. That's 3 of my colleagues, and another colleague from South Africa, whose firm is very involved in developing joint solutions between government, public companies, and community members. And they do a lot of evaluation and impact measurement there. And we're really talking about what we have learned about how this is so doable to engage stakeholders. It's not something that we should say it's too costly, because if we want to talk about impact, we can't have that conversation. As Sasha Dichter said in our planning meeting from 60 Decibels, if there's an impact report that hasn't asked stakeholders what impact means to them, there should be a warning on the cover. Warning, we have written a report about impact without talking to anybody who has been impacted by this fund. So let's just say that I'm really excited about sharing and trying to promote stakeholder engagement in the measurement and management of impact. Besides our own session, I can't wait to hear what Kathy Clark and Fran Siegel say about the state of affairs. They're always a regular part of the Socap conference. I'm very excited about the GIN is going to be announcing their racial equity theme and lens about how to bring racial equity more into the fold of measuring impact, measurement, and management. I'm very interested in what Kimberly Cornett and Chris Hermans have to say about the use of guarantees and community-based finance. I'm excited about hearing many people. I'm just going to miss those little side conversations and the beer garden and the networking and fun with my colleagues. How about you, Matt? What are you looking forward to at Socap, or Sara?
Well, that's a great question, Jane. I know for me, when I've gone in the past, one of my really the part that I get the most out of is connecting one-on-one with people outside of sessions. And so, I actually feel like that's really something I expect that I'll miss this year, but I see they're trying to find ways to allow people to, connect one-on-one. So I'm hopeful there'll be at least some facsimile of that.
Yeah, I did go to a virtual cocktail party last year.
What about you, Sara? What are you looking forward to about Socap?
Well, this will actually be my first time at Socap. So low expectations because of the virtual environment, but I'm sure that it'll be an opportunity to just learn about a lot of different things. You said at the beginning, people think impact investing or the field of impact investing is sort of confusing and it's broad. And it doesn't have to be. I think you gave us some really great examples of organizations that are trying to make things clearer for everybody. But it is broad. I mean, it is a really broad space. And so there's a lot of financial instruments, types of investments that we, don't use here, that we don't interact with, that I really enjoy hearing about. What are people doing that is really innovative or kind of doing something for the first time, just to learn about those things.
Yeah, it will deliver. It will deliver.
Jane, you've worked with Rockefeller Foundation on ways to increase the use of evidence in impact measurement. There were a couple of case studies you conducted, and one of them was on Green Canopy, a Seattle-based developer of sustainable and net zero homes. How did impact measurement help Green Canopy, and who did it help?
Wow, that's a tough question, Matt. Thanks for putting me on the spot here. But I actually really am happy to say something about how Green Canopy approached impact measurement and management. For those, so it is a case study that I did as part of my advising with Rockefeller about what does it look like in the real world when at the point that I did Green Canopy, which is a green building company, and that runs its own impact fund as well. How have they approached impact measurement management? They're not a large, $1 billion enterprise. They're not, 40 years old. They came around. They had the guts to be born during the recession of 2008. So it was a really nice example of how a social enterprise and a fund can actually incorporate impact measurement management. They had been doing their due diligence. They had been doing, B labs, and they had been doing other kinds of measurement standards that had existed. But what I really was invited to do was help them build a theory of change, to help them not just respond to what other people tell them to measure, but to actually get in front and say, what is important for us to measure? How will we know we're having our intended impact? And what that theory of change development, which I really am so committed to the importance of a theory of change, and I'm delighted to see that in the impact investing field, theory of change has really been integrated as an important part of developing objectives and strategy and purpose. And the theory of change is a way to say, what do we believe we can change if we were to implement the strategies and invest in the companies that we're investing in? And in their theory of change, they were able to elevate not only their commitment to climate solutions and protecting pristine environments, but they also were able to bring in the dimensionality of inclusion of affordable housing, which doesn't often come together in the green building space. I mean, often that's seen as a privileged elite, non-affordable.
Right, it's sort of like the Tesla of affordable of green homes.
Yeah, exactly. And so they really stand out as an organization that says that everybody deserves to live in a home where they can actually, do no harm to the environment and have, net zero impact. And so that became really clear in their theory of change and became an area for measurement, as well as what effect they're having on the environment. And what that did is not only gave them new categories for holding themselves accountable and making sure their strategies were actually working in that way. And they are doing some amazing innovative strategies, partnering with community members, trying to, in low-income communities, and doing more urban infill, which is really an important strategy so that people can afford to live in different communities in environmentally sound homes. But what they also did is that just changes the categories of what data they regularly collect. And so that's a good example in my mind. This is not a huge social global enterprise. This is a smaller enterprise which has funds that helps fund their enterprise as well, and that they have actually been able to articulate what really matters to them and that they want to manage impact around.
So I'm going to ask this next question slightly different than we sent it to you before. Impact can mean different things. And for an individual, how can someone think about impact in their personal investments? How do you think about impact in your personal investments? Whether that's your bank account or retirement funds or kind of any of the options in between. As someone with the type of career and focus that you've had, how do you relate that back to sort of your personal financial decisions?
I think that's a question that's the heart of all of this. I mean, because in some ways, in order to be a qualified investor, it's almost saying that impact investing has become a space where it's not available to everybody or in everybody's mindset. It's not necessarily even available to your options when you're choosing your 401k or your, IRA options, through your company. So we have not yet made the connection societally between our investment options and how we think about that and in our own value system. And so if you think about, like, as many people have written, such as Jen Emerson and others, about, the meaning of money and values, we all need to do the same thing that large institutional investors are doing, in that we need to ensure that we are creating the financial return for our own lives and our families and our financial goals. At the same time, we need to be aware that every dollar that we invest has an implication, both positive and negative. And I have to finish the sentence: intended and unintended. I mean, that's really what impact is. So that it makes me more aware that I need to make decisions around where my dollars are living. And that being said, I've been part of a group of people about impact, impact investing, around what that really means for me. And it's very hard as an individual to make choices, and it's not your choice alone. You've got family members that you are making these decisions with. But there's a notion in modern economic theory about a balanced portfolio. And a balanced portfolio usually entails having some higher financial return investments and others that might be lower financial return investments. And then there's grant investments or philanthropic or charitable investments, which actually are investing with a zero return, but that's where your values are. And too many of us are thinking, well, I do my good work through my charity, and then my money needs to be making money for my future. And I like to try to find ways where I integrate some of my investments are really aimed at, I don't really go for the highest returns. I'm not that kind of player, but I really want to make sure that the money is there for me when I am in retirement one day. And I want to make sure the money is in places that aren't doing harm to people in society. But I'm putting money in places where it is about a pure impact investment play, and taking risks on things where the financial return may or may not be there, but I'm actually going after the impact return alongside my long-standing commitment to charitable contributions. So I really believe in the balance. And there's something that it's called the efficient frontier when you talk about risk and returns. And there's something I'm really fond of that's now called the efficient impact frontier, which suggests adding another dimension to your frontier, which is look at risk and return on the finance side, and then look at risk and return on the impact side, and create some balance across all of your investments. And that's just Jane speaking now personally, that I like to see my money represented in a really balanced way.
Thanks, Jane. I think your reference to portfolio theory is a really good reference for financial professionals, and also just a good way to sort of get us to think more about that. In one of our previous episodes, Dr. Stephanie Gripney also refers to kind of an entire portfolio and not thinking of returns as, like you said, either your grant side or your investments. But there's so many things in between. And even as you mentioned at the beginning, retail investors or unaccredited investors may have less options. There's more and more in the market. So investors individual investors, you do actually have more control. But I like that thinking about it as a portfolio really means you can look at all the options. So thanks for telling us kind of how you're looking at it.
Right. And, and from a standpoint of any individual, there's really nothing stopping anyone from asking their employer, what are my ESG fund options? What are my impact investing options? That's something that a number of people feel, that there's too many people who are concerned about it or holding a lot of myths that they say we can't really do this responsibly. And there's a lot of regulation around pension funds that, cause employers to not be able to provide those options. But that is something that every individual can be asking their employers about and seeing what options are available to them.
And I think the trends are showing that there's going to be just more and more options. And like you said, more regulation, maybe in a good way, around transparency. The federal government's retirement plan, the TSA, is going to be offering ESG options soon. So that's a huge player in the market. And I think we're going to see a lot more smaller companies kind of giving those options as well. So thanks for reminding us of that. So just one more question. You've written about the need for intersectional gender and racial equity. Moreover, you did so before the murder last year of George Floyd and other Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and a continued shift in the national conversation on racial justice. So what does intersectional gender and racial equity mean to you, and how is that relating to impact measurement and management?
Yes, let's just take one of the hardest subjects ever. and it's not even a subject, it's life. It's what happens in the fabric of life and the water all around us. Is that, I think, the George Floyd murder and murder of so many other people has really brought into the public conversation and our zeitgeist a lot of questioning about, do we just assume that our system inequalities have been here, that it's up to individuals to change their lives, or is that something that can be done more through our institutions and systems? And my background is as a sociologist. I know that you've had other sociologists in your speaker series before, and I think that it's not a surprising path that I would have gravitated to finance at some point, because one of the greatest drivers of society and behavior is our capital markets. And so if we want to actually make changes in race and gender inequality, we can't just look at it in terms of our interpersonal behaviors. We can't just look at it in terms of government policies. We need to look at it in terms of capital flow as well. And the intersectionality is, more of an academic term, where you can't just look in any one vertical and look at race without also looking at gender and also looking at income. Because when we start looking in cross categories, we start to see patterns that low income, people of color, and particularly women, are the ones that have the strongest wealth gaps, or the biggest wealth gaps. And the pandemic, in addition to the racial reckoning period we're in, the pandemic has only exacerbated this, as we know, as we've seen so many statistics. In the US, I have not verified this, but I have heard, so I'm just going to say it as a suggestion, that women's economic employment statistics have dipped down to the level of the 70s. So I'm not citing that as data and evidence. I've heard that. I need to verify that. But whatever it is, we do know that women have been disproportionately impacted by homeschooling and by the elimination of jobs during the pandemic and reduced wages during the pandemic. So if we are thinking about impact, no matter what impact we're talking about, I'm a firm believer we need to look at, again, the who, impact for whom, and what is the effect on women and other gender categories, and what is the effect on people of color when we talk about impact. And we don't, and if we continue along the lines that if we keep creating solutions, everybody has an equal opportunity to have access to those solutions. It's not borne out by the systemic patterns that we've observed, in which we need to much more deliberately look at what is inhibiting the flow of capital and to different population groups, and how can we actually address those gaps better. And all my advising work and all my measurement work and all my evaluation work, I tirelessly bring up the importance of, let's look at this through the lens of gender and through race and understand what kind of impact, and for every impact investor to really declare how much is that a priority in their investment strategy.
Jane, thank you so much. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. It's been such a great conversation. Thanks to everyone for tuning in, and to those of you who sent in questions. And thank you, Jane, for joining us in this series of interviews we're calling Alignment: Using Your Values to Invest in Social Change.
Thank you. It's been an honor, and it's been a very fast hour talking with all of you about these really interesting topics. Appreciate the invite.
And please join us at the same time on Wednesday, November 24th, the day before Thanksgiving, for our next interview in the Alignment series. Or should I say, please join Matt, because I will be leaving Oikocredit to start a new position with a San Francisco-based impact-focused investment bank. It's been a pleasure to be part of this team, and I've especially enjoyed connecting with so many Oikocredit stakeholders over the past year and a half.
We are going to miss you so very much, Sara. You've truly made a lasting difference at Oikocredit US. And to measure just a few of your impacts, you helped us understand the impact investing market and what investors are looking for. You helped to streamline and manage our operations, and you helped us launch this alignment series. Our very best wishes for you in your next chapter. This webinar series is made possible by generous donations from people like you. You can also invest in Oikocredit's impact through our recoverable grant program. To learn more about Oikocredit US or how to support our mission to improve living standards in low-income countries, visit our website at oikocreditus.org. Until next time, on behalf of Sara and me and everyone at Oikocredit US, thanks for your support. See you soon.